obviously I'm from an Italian background, and there's, I think back to having, when my nonna was alive, but probably more so through my mum, like they really did have the village.
Yeah, they did.
Like they
really
were,
did.
for my understanding, they were the quintessential village, right? So they would all be in the small villages.
Yeah. And they were all helping each other.
And they would all help each other, right? So, for me, even though I had my experience postpartum, it was still, my mum was there pretty much every day cooking.
Yeah.
So, again, it still comes back to this food and this nourishment and this sense of just let me feed you so I can heal you. So previously on No Place Like Home, we were chatting with the beautiful U-Fhern and her confinement experience, which kind of got us thinking, didn't it, Jess, about what other cultures do, how do we benefit, how do we add value to women of this society and culture around us and the community. So we kind of just kept talking about that, didn't we? Because I just think that U-Fhern's story about confinement was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And then we got talking about, again, your experience in Berlin, having your baba. Maybe let's just talk to the listeners about what that experience is. Not we've gone through your experience, but maybe just in general, like what Germany and the healthcare system provide for their citizens.
Very different to what's on offer in Australia. So I guess I did have home births both births. So in Germany and in Australia, I had a different level of care than some mums would have received because I had those midwives. But as a general rule, in Germany, when you have your baby, you have visits from your midwife for, I think mine was coming every second day for 2 weeks. But then I had plenty of milk. I was healing. I was bonding with my baby. It was all wonderful. So then her visits stopped. But if I needed her, she would have kept coming until I didn't need her anymore. In addition to that, there's also the state pays for pelvic floor physios. So, luckily I didn't suffer from incontinence, but I did have a really awful issue with my tailbone at one stage. Which apparently was a pelvic floor issue.
Right.
I never took up the free pelvic floor physio appointments because it was all in German and it felt at the time just a bit overwhelming for me to navigate. But the fact that exists is so important because so many women have incontinence issues that it's almost like culturally we're just told, it's just part of having a baby. Like that's just...
I didn't realise how big an issue it was, and it was only when I spoke to a girlfriend of mine who is actually a midwife at the Royal Women's, and this is very early on when I was talking, about home, and she was the one that said to me, you need to do something around incontinence because it is huge. And I was like, what do you mean? And no one talks about it.
Yeah, no one talks about it. There's a lot of shame around it. And it's often the reason that women end up in retirement villages or homes because they can't, when you're that old and you can't control your bladder, it can be the difference between being able to live independently and needing to live with someone. And it's not just your bladder. There's such thing as fecal incontinence too, so people that can't help but poo their pants.
Oh, wow.
And it's just so normalised or just sort of brushed away. And, a pelvic floor physio in Australia is so expensive. And then you go and then they say, oh, you need an appointment in 2 weeks, but they don't have any appointments available for you. And it's just,
is that because there's not enough of them?
There's not enough, yeah.
And does that fall under the umbrella of women's health? So sometimes when I look them up on Instagram and all the rest of it, they'll kind of have this umbrella of, women's pelvic health.
Yeah, yeah. So I actually don't know. Because there's people who do internal pelvic release work.
Yes.
I don't know if that's different to a pelvic floor physio or not, because I know that sometimes massage therapists do it and they aren't necessarily physios.
No,
you know?
I'm
So
talking about
there's
the women that are qualified with the internal, to be able to do the internal checks of your pelvic floor.
Yeah,
your
I
pelvic
don't think
health.
you have to be a physio to get that qualification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're quite amazing.
Yeah. So, that's just another area where Germany is looking after their birthing people by making sure that if you need a pelvic floor physio, you have access to one and you don't have to pay for it. I mean, in a way you are paying for it because health insurance is mandatory. You have to have health insurance if you live in Germany. And the way they do it is that you pay, most places set it up so that you pay half and your employer pays half. But then that gives you access to everything you need. All of your midwife or obstetrician visits while you're pregnant, all of the birth, all of the visits afterwards, they're all covered. And now the health insurance in Germany is now paying for postpartum doulas. So, so it has to be, it's not just like, not anyone can get one. But if you have a letter from, say you had a cesarean or you had twins or you are having a really hard time with the huge transition into motherhood, your midwife or your GP or your obstetrician can write a letter that means that you can get free postpartum doula care. I mean, it's just...
So it's like the equivalent of if the government actually put postpartum care on Medicare.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is what we'll
and
be
the private health funds also started covering it. That would be nice. I mean, no one's looking at how much money it's saving them,
Well, this was a huge part of the research that I was doing in the interim when I started speaking to investors and philanthropists and all the rest of it, is that the saving of actually front-ending preventative care in postpartum as opposed to the recovery care after someone's been diagnosed with postnatal, they're the numbers that we're trying to affect as well with this preventative care. But it's like something in the order of, I think, over the lifetime. So when they say lifetime, I think it's 7 years of a child. Across Australia was like $73 billion.
Wow.
That's a significant amount of money. Yeah, it's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So another big factor, I think, and this doesn't really play into postpartum care so much, but I think it's really a really interesting point, is when you have a baby in Germany, you get Elterngeld, so parent money, for the first year of your baby's life. So it's like being on maternity leave for a year.
Oh.
And they don't pay your full wage. They pay, there's a minimum wage, there's a minimum amount, and then they will pay, I think it's up to 75% of your wage. I'd need to check. It's been a long time.
So does that supersede, so you know how here we have maternity leave and the government pays for whatever it is.
However many weeks. It's changing.
Remember now. Yeah, because it's probably changed. But so is it like that equivalent, but they stretch it out for a full year?
Yeah. And also, in addition to that, you get Kindergeld every month until your child is 18 or until they move out of home. I mean, it's just, finances are so important. We take such a massive pay cut when we become parents, and just having that support from the government so that we can thrive and take care of ourselves and take care of our kids and not have to be stressed about money. What a different world.
I know. The problem is, though, when I feel like we're speaking to these people in systems and government, and particularly here in Australia, we're trying to with the presence of home and this podcast, we're trying to flip the narrative from, the birth pregnancy story to your postpartum, similar to what U-Fhern said,
Yeah.
And I think it's so beautiful and so true about the first 40 days being the representation of your next 40 years.
Yeah.
Like, that really resonates with me. Like, I think about how my mother's gone through menopause and then I look back and to the stories that she told me about her postpartum and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then knowing other women that had, they rested for their postpartum period and then how that looking at their menopause experience, it's like, oh no, I didn't have hot flushes. I didn't. And look, there's a gross generalization on that as well and everyone's different, but it kind of does resonate that if we just look after ourselves, it permeates.
And I mean, so my postpartum experience with Jude, as we've discussed, was quite different because I was living here. I did still get very good care, but it's so different to what you have access to in Germany. And there's a lot of other European countries where, like I know that in the Netherlands you get a midwife visit every day for 10 days.
Yes.
It's just, there's so many amazing systems set up to support mums in other countries. Did you, speaking of traditions, was there anything from your culture that you brought into your
Well, I was just thinking
postpartum?
about that. And there's probably, obviously I'm from an Italian background and there's, I think back to having, when my nonna was alive, but probably more so through my mum, like they really did have the village.
Yeah, they did.
Like they
really
were,
did.
for my understanding, they were the quintessential village, right? So they would all be in the small villages.
Yeah. And they were all helping each other.
And they would all help each other, right? So, for me, even though I had my experience postpartum, it was still, my mum was there pretty much every day cooking.
Yeah.
So again, it still comes back to this food and this nourishment and this sense of just let me feed you so I can heal you. Even now we still sit around the table and for some reason Italians just think we all need to heal each other at the same time even when we're 40 years old by eating. But, it is, I always had mum there, cooking for me and, and even my mother-in-law, like now even, her vegetable garden is the most incredible thing. And she's constantly picking food and bringing it over, so that nurturing of food, I think, was my constant in my postpartum experience.
And that cultural thing that was passed down.
Yeah, and obviously that will shift and change for me with my children.
Well,
only because of, I think.
They'll be staying at home.
Well, I hope so.
They won't.
They'll be asking for me. I'll be like, no, I'm going to help other women. So I suppose, it's an interesting, as much as there was nothing specific like the confinement that U-Fhern spoke about with, the traditional Chinese herbs and having certain things on certain days, I think for me it was just that the presence of my mum there and cooking for me just generally.
And I just want to use this conversation as a moment to share with people that if you're listening on Spotify, there's a question box. I only just found out about this. So if anyone has any questions for us or if anyone wants to share with us what traditions they brought from their own cultures that they integrated into their postpartum, or, if like me, you gave birth in another country and the way you were treated was vastly different to how you were treated here or how mums are treated here, we would really love to hear
absolutely
about other people's experiences. So,
yeah, I think one of the most important things for us to do when caring for new mums is to provide that space, support and encouragement for you to feel empowered in making those choices that you want to make for your family. And that includes embracing tradition and culture, whatever its benefit is, as long as it's, you know, caring for the mother. And if we can integrate all of those things into a space like home, or even you just now, you know, if you're really new to postpartum and you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't have any support, you know, you might be an expat, you know, this is something that is really big as well. You know, what are these little things, you know, go and jump on the Ilan House of Wellness and, you know, buy a beautiful tea for yourself, or buy the soak, or you know,
say no to that social engagement that you've been invited to 2 days after your baby's due date, and instead feel zero guilt for staying at home and resting with your baby.
Yeah. All of those beautiful things. I think what we're hoping to do as well on the podcast is really talk to women from all walks of life, all cultures, all ethnicities, all diversities, to also get really beautiful snippets like U-Fhern did with us, just that beautiful little insight into what their traditions are, what their thoughts are.
What worked, what didn't.
And how we can all take those beautiful little pieces of all of that and how do we integrate that into our lives. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm constantly researching all of these things, thinking about how we can bring it into the space of home. But I think every day it's important, as we're releasing these podcasts, for us to really be able to enhance the current experiences for women and them in their postpartum journey.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.